Welcome to Life Sciences Decoded, where we dive into the people, companies, and technology shaping the future of life sciences and healthcare. I'm your host, Susan Najjar, and today we're speaking with the legendary clinical trial tech executive, Steve Rosenberg, about the life sciences industry's responsibility to ease the patient's journey and his mission to improve the pivotal patient-site relationship. Steve says, clinical trial technology shouldn't just be functional, it should incorporate a patient mindset design, eliminating barriers and bridging science, patients, and progress. Welcome, Steve Rosenberg. I am very excited to be speaking with legendary clinical trial technology executive Steve Rosenberg, CEO of uMotif. Steve has earned a global reputation for combining vision, pragmatism, and frankly, blunt talk about the life sciences industry's responsibility to ease the patient's journey. Steve, it's wonderful to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
I'm thrilled to be talking with you. Steve, your quote was really intriguing. So often we talk about the data, compliance, and failure or success of a clinical trial, but you bring the patient to the forefront. Why do you believe the most important clinical trial relationship is between the site and the patient?
Well, thank you for that question. I've been talking about the patient for a long time. It first hit me how important the patient was when I realized that they're actually the heroes of the clinical trial. They're sacrificing time, body. Sometimes they enroll in a clinical trial because it's their last chance of survival. Sometimes they enroll to pay it forward, and sometimes they just feel that it benefits society. And it first hit me when I was flying. We all travel a lot, and I was boarding an airplane, and they asked for active military people first. And I wonder why they don't just ask for clinical trial participants. It is another form of sacrifice. It seems to me that society should recognize them as the heroes they are. So if you turn that into clinical research, the pharma companies called patient subjects up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. That's what they call their mice. They call their mice subjects. And the patient journey and the patient compliance, you talked about the data. It is the most important thing in a clinical trial. It's a statistical hypothesis that needs to be proven through data. More and more, the data that's needed is coming from the patient. So if you don't recognize the patient's willingness to both participate and be compliant in a clinical trial, you're losing some very important information about the trial and about the patient potentially. You couple that with more and more rare disease trials that have smaller populations of patients that you can recruit against, each patient becomes that much more valuable within the clinical trial. So what makes a patient want to be in a clinical trial? We talked about that for a second, but what makes them stay in the clinical trial? I think the key relationship in a clinical trial is between the patient and the investigator or the site, the personnel. I've known people who've been in clinical trials who've been both sick and just wanted to try something new, and they couldn't tell you who the sponsor was. They just know that the person who is helping and guide them through the consent process, through the enrollment process, through the screening process, is the person that they build the trust and the relationship with. That relationship is what, in my opinion, keeps a patient compliant and is still a willing participant within the trial. That's why I think it's the most important relationship.
Your perspective is so incredibly important and valuable. Drugs and devices are being developed to improve the health of patients, as you talked about. But why do clinical trials fail to prioritize them?
Oh, you should ask pharma that. I think some of that is the technology's fault. If you talk to anybody that's been in this pharma business, they will tell you that the single most important thing in a clinical trial is safety. That's what they worry about the most. And that comes before anything else is the safety of the patient. And they rely on the sites to monitor that safety and monitor the health of the patient because the sponsors can't do that. And I believe that they're true to their word, that they care about safety more than anything. By the time they get a drug into humans, it's gone through a lot of different steps to ensure the safety as much as they possibly can. And sometimes they get it wrong, rarely, but sometimes they get it wrong and it's not that safe. So I don't think it's that problem. But the problem is the technology that they've been giving to the patients has not taken the patient into account. Before I get into the details of that, more and more therapeutic areas today, the endpoints, or at least the labeling claims, are based on patient's experience. You look at pain, you look at sleep. Cancer drugs now get approved based on quality of life, not necessarily just extending life. And more the patient-reported outcomes is key to the drug's success in the marketplace. And historically, the technology that has been used to do that has always started with the protocol and said, all right, here are the 4 questionnaires you need to fill out in this schedule. Okay, patient, go and do it. You have to do it. You have no choice. And we expect you to do it. We're paying you money, and go ahead and fill out these forms. That has to be done. You have to get the forms filled out. What we do at uMotif, and the reason that I joined uMotif was because we take a look at not only that, like what's the schedule that has to be filled out, but what does the patient need to be in that clinical trial? What kind of information can we give them? We give them videos. We say thank you. The way we do reminders, the user interface that we have that's patented, all those things make for a patient-oriented experience rather than a protocol-oriented experience. And it makes that relationship that the patient has with the clinical trial so much more powerful and compliant. You take that and couple it with the way that we do consent, electric consent, that helps the patient really understand what they're getting into. You're building that trust relationship. You're helping the patient. You're guiding the patient through the clinical trial. And the technology is now enabling that trust relationship between the site and the patient.
What you say makes so much sense. But having this patient-centric mindset and processes that support putting the patient first, why is it so difficult to adopt? You talk about uMotif's mindset, not why is it so difficult for the
Yeah,
industry
I
to
really
adopt?
wish I could speculate on a couple of things. But I think when your company develops a protocol, they're doing a scientific, they're trying to keep track of what countries they need to do the protocol. There's a million moving parts in a protocol, everything from the drug manufacturing to the drug delivery. If there's a placebo, how to manufacture the placebo, how to get all the supplies to the right investigator sites, how to educate the investigator sites around the protocol. And if there are devices, whether they're phones that need to be provisioned or tablets that need to be provisioned or diabetic test strips or wearable devices. There's a lot of complicated things that go on in getting a clinical trial up and ready for that first patient to come in to a site in some country. All the translations, all the IRB approvals, it is extremely complicated. And I think what ends up happening is the patient gets lost in the mindset. I think what happens is while they're figuring out supply chain problems and while they're figuring out the 17 tools they have to use, how they're going to randomize, how they're going to dose, and how they're going to do a statistical plan, I think the patient and the human nature of this thing starts to get lost. And it's not because they don't care about the patient, it's just that it becomes an abstract thing as opposed to a person with a family and a life and that's going to make a sacrifice to do this. So you'll see more and more pharma companies start to have patient advocates and patient officers that are supposed to serve as constant reminders that you have a human, like a Steve Rosenberg out there with a family that's going to drive to Dana-Farber to get administered this experimental drug and hope he gets better or doesn't die. I just think they get lost. I don't think it's dastardly intention. I just think with all the things to put up a clinical trial, I think it's hard for these people to keep the patient in the middle.
It, it really makes a lot of sense. There's so many complexities with it. Turning towards the technology perspective, that's what I love to get into, and I know you do too.
Yep.
So, what are the most promising areas of clinical trials where technology can make a real impact in this patient-site relationship? And where do you see clinical trial technology headed in the next 18 months to 2 years?
18 months to 2 years, who knows?
Or
But
whatever you think is the right span.
I try to think, my wife and I have this expression, 1 cup of coffee at a time.
Exactly.
We'll
Right.
take life 1 cup of coffee at a time. The trick for technology, and I've been a technologist in a million different areas, clinical research for the last 20 something years, but a bunch before that, is that technology should be relatively invisible. It's a tool that nobody should be driving to work or starting their day worrying about the technology. We all pick up our phones now for almost everything, but I don't think about the technology. I think about the app I'm going to open and am I going to find out what's going on in the world and baseball scores or whatever is amusing me on that day. But I don't think about the technology. So I think technology needs to be somewhat invisible. On the other hand, it needs to enable what you want out of the functions that it's performing. And so I think technology has gotten in the way of this site-patient relationship because it's been very, top-down focused. Here's your device. Here's how you fill it out. Here's what you do on a daily basis. It's completely locked up. You can't do anything but this on this device. It's not your regular phone. And so the industry has evolved now into people using their own phones for these kinds of things. So it's just part of their lives now. They don't have to carry two devices. And in our case, it's just another app, and it fits in. When our founders started the company, it wasn't a clinical trial, it was as a healthcare play. And they thought their competition was Instagram and TikTok because they were just trying to buy some time on the person's phone experience. We've taken that consumer experience into clinical research.
Okay.
When you use our app on the phone, it feels like other apps. It doesn't feel like something foreign. We have a great user interface. Yes, for the validated instruments, they have to be licensed and look a certain way. But even that, we do a little better. And we thank people and do nudges and all kinds of things to make the technology more in line with what they're trying to accomplish when they come into the app. I'm trying to answer these 7 questions. I got this nice little reminder to tell me do it. I click on the reminder, it opens up this beautiful thing, fill it out, go about their business. So, but the technology for the most part has been in the way of that. It's been difficult for patients to access and use, and it's troublesome. And I think it's getting a lot better. The other thing going on there from a technology is all the tools within clinical research, EDC, RTSM, those are all kind of said and done. They're not going to change that much over time. You may come up with another titration algorithm, but they're not going to change a lot. Now that we're putting technology in patients' hands, the possibility of what you can do with that is never ending. It's going to change a lot over time, and we need to keep up with it. As technologists, we need to continue to enhance and broaden the platform to allow for what patients can and will do as they participate in clinical trials.
Could you share a little bit more about uMotif and what your product does and how it makes the experience, if you will, seamless to the patient
Sure.
and how the trial benefits? Obviously, like you said, it's this data that's being inputted.
So we do it a few different ways. When we design a study, when we get a study, we get a protocol just like everybody else. We look at the time and events that has to happen. When do things have to be filled out? Sometimes it's complicated. You have to do this within 3 days before your clinic visit, et cetera. But we look at all that, and we have tools and technologies that make that very easy to configure. So we could just set that up very quickly. But then we look at it the other way too. We look at it, all right, what's the patient experience going to be? A great deal of empathy for what the patient's going to do. And so they're going to walk into let's say it's a pain study. So pain is one of the more interesting ones because in order to qualify, you have to have a certain amount of pain over time to be qualified. So the first thing that happens before you're even enrolled in the study is you'll get a device that has an app on it, a uMotif app, that will ask you to fill out 3 pain questionnaires a day. And if you're, and there's validated pain questionnaires, and if you're over 7 for 3 days in a row, you qualify for the study. So you got to think that that patient walks in, they're interested in the study, they clicked on a website, they show up at the clinic that's 10 miles from their house, and they start to talk about it. They decide they want to get screened, they bring the device home, they fill it out, they get called, you can come in. Now they go in to enroll in the study, and they have to get consented, and they have to then get provision with the device again, and they have to be explained what they're in for and what the dangers are of the drug. And it's a whole process that builds that trust relationship with that site at that time. The technology allows them to collaborate around consent, have a nice app that's on their phone, and it allows them to get comfortable with what they're about to do. And then during the conduct of the trial, not only do we have this great app and it feels just like an app on the phone, but we also have this great reporting and alert system that will let the site know if a patient hasn't filled out a questionnaire, the patient is due to come in, anything that would give them indication that the patient's not having a good experience. We also have this patented user interface called the motif, which looks like a flower where each petal represents a question, where you could ask questions that aren't clinical, but since it takes 20 seconds to fill out 10 questions, it's like, do you understand how important you are to the trial? Are you getting what you need? Do you feel valued? Is it impacting your life? Is it giving you financial hardship? All those kinds of questions to give some indication as to whether or not the patient is doing okay while they're in the trial, not clinically, but everything else that interrupts their life. Then we have a set of tools that enable the site to be able to work with the patient. If they need a lift, we have something we call patient ride, where it connects to Uber Health, some way that they can arrange a ride for to get to the clinic if they can't get there or parking's too hard. I was at the conference some number of years ago, and I stood in front of a bunch of cancer researchers in a relatively small room. And I asked them what the number one objection they had in enrolling, because they were wondering why only 15% of cancer patients enroll in clinical trials. And the number one objection they were getting was parking. Parking. So you would never think of that. And they're all going, yeah, parking is the biggest problem we have. And you think about it, going to Memorial Sloan Kettering or Dana-Farber, parking is not easy. It really isn't easy. And so there's a lot of aspects, but what our tools and technologies do that are different from others is they take the patient journey into account. They allow the site to be alerted to what's going on with the patient. They give the patient experience that's similar to the apps they use normally. Then they could alert the sites as to a patient that may not be compliant. You can call them and find out what's going on, and we could ask questions about how they're experiencing the trial. It really makes it a much better experience for the patient.
Takes into account the proactive approach, if you will. The fact that it's capturing data that most trials don't might be the most important piece.
Certainly, like if you have a rare disease trial, we do trials that'll have 40 patients. Each one of those patients is worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars. If they drop out halfway through, that's a big deal. And so you want to try to get as early warning that that may happening. And a lot has to do with the compliance of the questionnaires and asking these questions.
We like to end on a mythbuster, Steve. Many people believe that patient-centric trial technology design is too expensive given the need for the high initial investment in technology, services, and infrastructure. Is this true?
I'm so glad it's not. It doesn't cost you any more to take a patient-eccentric, patient view and a patient-centric approach to a clinical trial than it does to take a sponsor or a protocol-centric view. It's just your thinking and your mindset, not your money. I actually think it'll save you money because you'll get more success and less dropouts if you take the patient's opinion into account all the way through and make sure that their experience is optimized for what you're trying to accomplish. And you'll get better data, you'll get more compliant patients, and word of mouth for the next trial. They'll tell their friends how great it was.
Thank you for putting it in that perspective. I think there's a lot of people concerned about these initial investments, but that settles the dust, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all great
Yeah.
points. Thank you for speaking with me today to share your insights and knowledge on why the patient-site relationship is so critical to the success of drug and device development and why engaged patients means better trials. Thank you so much, Steve.
It's been my pleasure, Susan. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much.